Okay, let's try this again. Let's see if I can actually see your comments. So if you pop in, I want you to drop a comment right now to see if I can see it. Because Facebook being Facebook. And, this is being ridiculous. So I saw you. Thank you for all the comments on the last one. I saw them after I kind of closed it. So don't go anywhere because I'm actually going to start reading like pretty much immediately because I chatted before. I'm going to start with Chapter 3 of the Mothman Prophecies. And I might go back at a later time. Hey, Kelly, how are you? Yes, stick in. Okay, cool. I can see the comments. Word. And apparently I can see them very quickly. So Facebook ain't acting a fool. So I'm going to give it like 30 seconds to let people fall back in. And don't worry, if you guys miss anything, you can watch this video later. So I'm going to be reading for anybody who just kind of showed up again. Chapter 3 of the Mothman Prophecies by legendary Fortean journalist John Keel. And I'm going to be reading an article or two out of the occultist anthology Generation Hex, who my homie Amanda TZ gifted me, which is one of the coolest gifts I've gotten in a really long time. Book that means a lot to me. I keep saying that. One of the foundational, just like, kind of gifts from the magical side of the universe to me when I was like, 18, 19, 20, and I was first becoming a little mageling. And so, hi, Christine. And I'll say it again. Hydrate, you little BB witches. Now, as I give people another chance to kind of give it another 30 seconds, people to kind of filter in. Amanda, you're in Ecuador. Tell me about it since I can actually read the comments now. Tell me. Oh, I do have my pendulum, and I've been making a point to begin teaching a little bit of that because there's a lot of people who've been extending interest on how to develop their pendulum scrying, especially in my style as it connects to developing a intermediary or helper spirit that can dwell in that pendulum to help you do not only self-analysis, self-therapy, and communicate with all the parts of your brain and your heart and your spirit, but also, boundless, endless possibilities on being able to gain information outside of yourself as well. Like, it opens a lot of cool avenues, not only communicate with spirits and just finding data, but also how to process that data and put it into, and creating your own schemas and systems to translate data you've gotten from scrying to, kind of like ways they can understand it. I'll get into that later, but I know that a lot of you guys wanted me to do it. I've been pushing the idea of doing a class to actually help people develop that skill. But right now I'm going to be on my group Free Magician Society. I'm going to start doing posts on how to get people onto the beginning levels of that and, tricks and guidance on how to do that. But I figure if you guys are interested tonight, I'll do that as well. So it was a couple more seconds. So you just got to Ecuador last night. I'm glad you got some sleep. So my friend Amanda, my magician friend, she's traveling around South America right now, doing all sorts of crazy magic. Well, you better get your rest. Drink a margarita, put your feet up. Traveling takes it out of you. I get tired after like a week or two of traveling. I'm like, fuck this, I just want to play video games. So if you got a beer, grab it, or water. I'm going with water tonight. I drank quite a bit last night. So to summarize the Mothman Prophecies by John Keel, because I'm not going to read the first two chapters again. As I mentioned, that video got mysteriously deleted, so I might record them on YouTube and post the video up. Just like I might upload this one after I edit this whole beginning speech or talking. So if you have any questions about what's going on in the Mothman Prophecies, just drop in a comment. I'll pause and tell you. So basically, the idea of this book is John Keel is an investigative reporter, and he's at this point in his life. It's a true story, and he has decided he's going to investigate the entire UFO, cryptid, Fortean weird shit phenomena. This is in the 60s, specifically 1966, essentially when this is taking place. And he decides to check out an area in West Virginia's Ohio Valley, River Valley, where there's just a swarm of weird encounters and phenomena, from like UFOs people are seeing like every night en masse to, monsters and cryptids and weird shit to poltergeist activities to like just like weird people coming out of nowhere and harassing witnesses, saying that they're lying and saying that they're like military officers, and we're talking about like the Men in Black and things like that, and even weirder shit. But we'll get into that. So the first two chapters kind of was just talking about different things, especially the weirdies called the Men in Black as a global phenomenon, like strange, very physical people who seem to congregate around UFO flap areas, and specifically in Point Pleasant, West Virginia, in the 60s. So, alright. Chapter 3 of the Mothman Prophecies by John Keel. It's going to start off again talking about the Men in Black phenomenon. So, and this is part 1, another kind of man in black haunted Brooklyn, New York in 1877 to 1880. He had... Let me pause. This chapter is going to get into some of the historical depth of not only like the UFO stuff, but just weird shit and how long it's been going. Way further back than the 1947 sighting that kind of started the flying saucer boom, and how like the phenomena that is behind that has been going back a lot longer and might be divorced from the idea of like little spacemen. So, another kind of man in black haunted Brooklyn, New York in 1877 to 80. He had wings and performed aerial acrobatics over the heads of the crowds of sunbathers at Coney Island. A Mr. W.H. Smith first reported these strange flights in a letter to the New York Sun, September 18, 1877. The creature was not a bird, but a winged human form. This flying man became a local sensation, and according to the New York Times, September 12, 1880, which, by the way, you can look that up if you want. I have. It is, in fact, a newspaper article. Many reputable persons saw him as he engaged in flying towards New Jersey. He maneuvered at an altitude of about 1,000 feet, sporting bat's wings and making swimming-like movements. Witnesses claim to have seen his face clearly. He wore a cruel and determined expression. The entire figure was black, standing out sharply against the clear blue sky. Since he wasn't throwing an advertising sign behind him, and since the primitive gliders of experimenters during that period of time rarely traveled far, and then usually downhill, the incidents are without explanation. Leonardo da Vinci studied the flights of birds in the 15th century and tried to build a man-powered ornithopter without success. Thousands of other basement inventors have worked on the idea since, constructing canvas wings that were piloted mostly by the muscles of the optimistic pilots. Most of these weird-looking machines became instant junk on their first test flights, and several overconfident types went crashing to their deaths when they leaped off cliffs and high buildings in their homemade wings. It was not until May 2nd, 1962, that a man really succeeded in flying under his own power. Mr. John C. Wimpenny flew 993 yards at an altitude of 5 feet in a contraption with rigid wings and a pedal-driven propeller at Hatfield, Hertfordshire, in England. The principle of the ornithopter, propulsion through the bird-like movement of wings, has been known for centuries, but no one has been able to make it work. No human, that is. Machines flying through the air with moving wings have frequently been sighted during UFO waves. But the UFO enthusiasts tend to ignore any reports which describe things other than discs or cigar-shaped objects. In 1905, a titanic white bird fluttered around California. One witness, J.A. Jackson, a well-known resident of Silshe, was paying a visit to his outhouse at 1:30 a.m. on August 2nd when he saw a brilliant light in the sky. It seemed to be attached to a 70-foot airship with wings. The mysterious machine appeared to be propelled by the wings alone, and rose and fell as the wings flapped like a gigantic bird. The Brawley, California News reported August 4th, 1905. Others in the area reported seeing the same thing. Winged beings are an essential part of the folklore of every culture. From the times of Babylonia and the pharaohs, sculptors were preoccupied with putting wings on lions and unidentified beasts. Although the angels of biblical times were never described as being winged, painters and sculptors have always persisted in giving them feathered appendages. Actually, the old-time angels appeared like ordinary human beings. They even had supper with Lot. When demons overran the planet during the Dark Ages, they were also recorded as monstrous entities with bat wings. Remote areas of the world are still said to be inhabited by harpies and winged humanoids. On July 11, 1908, the famous Russian traveler V.K. Arseniev was trekking along the Gobili River when he had this encounter. This is from Yuri B. Petrenko, forerunner of the Flying Lady of Vietnam, Flying Saucer Review, Volume 19, Number 2, March to April 1973, page 29 to 30. I saw the mark on the path that was very similar to a man's footprint. My dog Alpha bristled up, snarled, and then something rushed about nearby, trampling among the bushes. However, it didn't go away, but stopped nearby, standing rock still. He had been standing like that for some minutes. Then I stooped to pick up a stone and threw it towards the unknown animal. Then something happened that was quite unexpected. I heard the beating of wings. Something large and dark emerged from the fog and flew over the river. A moment later, it disappeared into the dense mist. My dog, badly frightened, pressed itself to my feet. After supper, I told the Udhihi men about this incident. They broke into a vivid story about a man who could fly in the air. Hunters often saw his tracks that appeared suddenly and vanished suddenly, alighted on the ground, then took off again into the air. In Mexico, there are stories of the Icals, tiny black men endowed with a power of flight who live in caves and kidnap humans. In India, the giant bird known as the Garuda is an important part of the mythology. The gods Vishnu and Krishna traveled around the heavens on the back of a great Garuda. North American Indians have extensive legends about the thunderbird, a huge bird said to carry off children and old people. It was accompanied by loud noises, hums, buzzes, and apparently rumbles from the infrasonic and ultrasonic levels. Known as a piasa to the Indians of the Dakotas, it was supposed to have terrifying red eyes and a long tail. We are dealing with three types of phenomena in these cases. The first is the winged man. The second is a giant bird, so huge it is a biological impossibility. Third, we have a monstrous demon with red eyes, bat wings, and a body closely human in form. All three are probably interrelated. Research is still fragmentary, but there is journalistic evidence that the winged man of 1880 was not confined to Coney Island. His activities were just a publicity gambit, attracting the notice of the staid New York Times, and thus attaining a measure of respectability, so that when anyone anywhere else saw him, they had a frame of reference. According to the Louisville, Kentucky Courier Journal, July 29, 1880, the winged man was busy in that area. Two men, C.A. Youngman and Bob Flexner, reported seeing a man surrounded by machinery which he seemed to be working with his hands. He had wings or fans on his back, which he was flapping rather desperately to keep aloft. The startled men watched him flutter unsteadily out of view. But he would be back. Now, I want to make a point outside of the reading that what makes a lot of these interesting is you have oftentimes similar reports or of weird shit happening. You know, this is back in the day, to the 1800s, to the 60s. This book, it takes place in the late, mid to late 60s and even into the 70s a little bit. But a lot of these reports are from newspapers or they're reported. But to keep in mind is, we have the conceit, we have the internet. We have TV and media and stuff like that often, like, if a report pops up, it spreads around and everybody can see it. But in a lot of these cases, you'll see a report of something weird and absurd in one town, and then on the same night sometimes, several states away, you'll have another report of equally, sometimes very different, but equally strange shit. And several people will report them. So what's interesting is that there was no way to have that information or data, passed along between reports at that time. Newspapers didn't have that infrastructure. like until somebody actually got the paper and read it or traveled to another town, then there was really no awareness of what was necessarily published in smaller town newspapers, for instance. But continuing, he would be back. Part 2. A year before the first flying saucer scare erupted in the state of Washington in 1947, a group of 16 people in San Diego, California witnessed a strange phenomena. They were gathered on a rooftop to watch a meteor shower on the night of October 9th, 1946, when a bluish-white winged object appeared in the sky. It looked like an extremely long airplane carrying 2 reddish lights, and it left a luminous contrail. The strange object was certainly no airplane, one witness told Harold T. Wilkins, who wrote a book called Flying Saucers on the Attack, New York, 1954, Chapter 3. The wings which moved were too wide for any bird. Indeed, they were rather like the wings of a butterfly. The whole object emitted a red glow. The object was especially conspicuous as it crossed the face of the moon. Some of the witnesses thought it resembled a gigantic bat. Astronomers have also reported similar objects. In Popular Astronomy 1912, Dr. F.B. Harris stated, "In the evening of January 27, 1912, I saw an intensely black object, like a crow, poised upon the moon. I estimated it at 250 miles long by 50 miles wide. I cannot but think that a very interesting phenomena happened." In that crazy year, 1880, an Italian astronomer named Enrico of the observatory at Palermo, Sicily, was studying the sun at 8 a.m. November 30th, when he saw winged bodies in 2 long parallel lines, slowly traveling apparently across the disk of the sun. They looked like large birds or cranes. Cranes on the sun, crows 250 miles long on the moon. Black-garbed men swimming through the skies over Coney Island, ornithopters over Kentucky and San Diego. On December 30th, 1946, Ella Young, an American writer, saw one of our bats at dusk near Morro Bay, California. On the golden sky it looked very black, she reported. It came forward head-on and had a bat-like appearance owing to the curvature of its wings. I am not sure if there were motions at the extreme tip of the wings, but the strange machine seemed to stand still for several minutes, and its form was very distinct. Suddenly it either lowered itself toward the horizon, or the bank of cloud mist made an upward movement. Maybe both movements occurred, for the machine passed behind the cloud and did not reappear. Immediately afterward, a great flush of color spread over the sea. May through August 1947 saw the first modern UFO wave in the United States. Odd lights, glistening circular machines, and reddish flying cigars captured the American imagination. Tiffany Thayer, the eccentric novelist and founder of the Fortean Society, named after Charles Fort, chortled over the Air Force explanations in the Society's journal Doubt. Obviously, the government was determined to cover up the true facts in this new situation. Mystics and cranks quickly appeared, explaining the phenomena as the work of people from outer space. The press gave the sensation a 2-week run, then went back to the intricacies of the Cold War. No one, not even the beady-eyed Forteans, paid much attention to the giant birds and machines with flapping wings that returned to our skies in 1948. Early in January 1948, Mrs. Bernard Zakowski reported seeing a sizzing and whizzing man with silver wings maneuvering about 200 feet above her barn in Chehalis, Washington. The Air Force scoffed. 4 months later, 2 laundry workers in Longview, Washington, about 40 miles south of Chehalis, claimed to see a trio of birdmen circling the city at an altitude of 250 feet. When they first came into sight, I thought they looked like gulls, but as they got closer, I could make out that they weren't gulls, and I knew they were men. Mrs. Viola Johnson told reporters, I could see plainly that they were men. They wore dark, drab flying suits. I couldn't make out the arms, but I could see their legs dangling down, and they kept moving their heads like they were looking around. I couldn't tell if they had goggles on, but their heads looked like they had helmets on. I couldn't see the faces. That happened in April 9th, 1948. That same day, a couple in Caledonia, Illinois, reported seeing a monster bird bigger than an airplane. Researchers Jerome Clark and Loren Coleman dug into Illinois newspapers and discovered that state had an epidemic of funny birds in 1948. Jerome and Clark and Loren Coleman, Winged Weirdies, Fate magazine, March 1972. That January, James Trares, 12, excitedly exclaimed to his mother, "There's a bird outside as big as a B-29." They lived in Glendale, Illinois. In April, a huge bird was reported in Alton, Caledonia, Overland, Richmond Heights, and Freeport, all in Illinois. Walter Sigmund, a retired Army colonel, saw it on April 4th. "I thought there was something wrong with my eyesight," he said, "but it was definitely a bird and not a glider or a jet plane. From the movements of the object and its size, I figured it could only be a bird of tremendous size." 3 people in Overland, Illinois, viewed the creature on April 10th. At first, they thought it was an airplane, then it began to flap its wings. By late April, the Garuda was buzzing the city of St. Louis. Dr. Christine Dolezal saw it on the 26th. A group of instructors at the Mississippi School of Aeronautics observed an awfully big bird at 1,200 feet the next day. A salesman named Harry Bradford complained, "I've seen it 3 times in the last 4 days, and that's too much tomfoolery for a man of 50 to take. I thought people who reported seeing the thing were bugs until I looked into the sky last night," Charles Dunn, an inspector for U.S. Steel, declared on April 30th. "It was flapping its wings and moving quite fast at about 3,000 feet altitude, and it appeared to be illuminated by a dull glow. It looked about the size of a Piper Cub plane, but there was no engine sound, and it was not a plane. I could hardly believe my eyes." Although the plane-sized bird was seen sporadically during the next decade, the flying saucers stole the limelight. The Air Force and the amateur investigators chose to pursue the more exciting Martians and Venusians. But the figure of a man with wings like a bat, dressed in tight-fitting black clothes and surrounded by an eerie glow, startled 3 people in Houston, Texas on June 18, 1953. "I could see him plain and could see he had big wings folded at his shoulders," Mrs. Hilda Walker said. "He was about 6.5 feet tall and was perched on the limb of a pecan tree. His halo of light slowly faded out, and he vanished. Immediately afterward," Mrs. Walker continued, "we heard a loud swoosh over the housetops across the street. It was like the white flash of a torpedo-shaped object. I may be nuts, but I saw it, whatever it was," Howard Phillips, another witness, declared. The next big year for our phantom flyers was 1961. Residents along Florida's T-Miami Trail began seeing what one woman described as a big vulture with a wide wingspread of about 55 feet. Isn't that sorta unusual? In May 1961, a New York pilot was buzzed by a damned big bird, bigger than an eagle. For a moment I doubted my sanity because it looked more like a pterodactyl out of the prehistoric past. The thing had swooped at his plane as he cruised up the Hudson River Valley. Far away, in the Ohio River Valley, another startled pair had an even more breathtaking experience. A woman prominent in civic affairs in Point Pleasant, West Virginia, was driving on Route 2 along the Ohio River with her elderly father. As they passed through a sector on the edge of a park known as the Chief Cornstalk Hunting Grounds, a tall, man-like figure suddenly appeared on the road in front of them. "I slowed down," she told me years later, "and as we got closer we could see that it was much larger than a man. A big gray figure. It stood in the middle of the road. Then a pair of wings unfolded from its back and they practically filled the whole road. It almost looked like a small airplane. Then it took off straight up, disappearing out of sight in seconds. We were both terrified. I stepped on the gas and raced out of there. We talked it over and decided not to tell anybody about it. Who would believe us anyway?" Dr. Jacques Vallée, French dietitian and computer expert, was given access to the Air Force's UFO files, and he came across a curious report from an Air Force colonel who was driving alone along a road in Illinois one night. no date is given, when he became aware of something flying above his car. It was, he said, a huge bird the size of a small airplane. It flapped its wings and soared away. There are shaggy bird stories by the pound. A businessman in Arlington, Virginia, wrote to me recently, describing an experience he and 3 friends had in the winter of 1968 to 1969. They were at a farm near Haymarket when they heard a strange rushing sound near a small lake. Intrigued, they set out with flashlights and a couple of dogs to investigate. Suddenly the dogs howled, turned tail, and ran. There, standing by a tree, was a huge dark shadow between 8 and 12 feet tall. The quartet scurried back to their car, turned on their lights, and swung towards the shadow. All we saw, he reported, was this huge thing with large red-orange eyeballs and wing-like arms. We couldn't get out of there fast enough. We even have a naked woman with wings in our collection. The case was investigated by Don Worley, an experienced student of the unknown, who interviewed the witness in depth. He is a reliable observer, Worley notes, and he swears that this event is well beyond the capacity of his imagination. Earl Morrison, the witness, was serving as a private first class in the Marine Corps in Vietnam in the summer of 1969. He and 2 buddies were sitting on top of a bunker near Da Nang on a warm summer evening. All of a sudden, I don't know why, we all 3 looked out there in the sky and we saw this figure coming towards us, he told Mr. Worley. It had a kind of glow and we couldn't make out what it was at first. It started coming towards us real slowly. All of a sudden, we saw that it looked like what looked like wings, like a bat's, only it was gigantic compared to what a regular bat would be. After it got close enough so we could see what it looked like a woman, a naked woman. She was black. Her hair was black. Her body was black. The wings were black. Everything was black. But it glowed. It glowed in the night, kind of a greenish cast to it. There was a glow on her and around her. Everything glowed. Looked like she glowed and threw off a radiance. We saw her arms toward the wings and they looked like regular molded arms, each with a hand and fingers and everything, but they had skin from the wings going over them. And when she flapped her wings, there was no noise at all. It looked like her arms didn't have any bones in them because they were limber just like a bat. She started going over us and we didn't hear anything. She was right above us, and when she got over the top of our heads, she was maybe 6 or 7 feet up. Hello, Joseph. We couldn't do anything. We didn't know what to do. We just froze. We just watched what was going over because we couldn't believe our eyes. So we watched her go straight over the top of us, and still she didn't make any noise, flapping her wings. She blotted out the moon once. That's how close she was to us. As we watched her, she got about 10 feet or so away from us. We started hearing her wings flap, and it sounded, like regular wings flapping. And she just started flying off, and we watched her for quite a while. The total time when we first saw her and could almost define her until we lost sight of her and were unable to define her was between 3 or 4 minutes. First reported in FSR Case Histories, number 10, June 1972. Vietnam had a big UFO wave in 1968 to 1969, which included an epidemic of phantom helicopters. On several occasions, the military forces on both sides fired at the objects without effect. Private First Class Morrison's account stands as one of the best close-up sightings of a winged entity. Part 4. A bright star appeared over the trees of Sandling Park, Hythe in Kent, New England, on the night of November 16, 1963, and so began one of the classics in ufology. 4 teenagers were strolling along a country road near the park, going home from a dance when the movements of the star caught their eyes. It dipped out of the sky and headed straight for them, finally dropping down behind some nearby trees. John Flaxton, 17, said he suddenly felt very cold, and a sense of overpowering fear engulfed the group. They started to run. The light, now a golden oval-shaped object, reappeared from behind the trees and seemed to move along with them from a distance of about 200 feet. When they stopped, the light stopped. When it was lost from sight behind the trees. Then it was lost from sight behind the trees. The four youngsters slowed down, catching their breath. Suddenly, a tall, dark figure emerged from the woods and waddled toward them. It was completely black and had no discernible head. Mervyn Hutchinson, 18, described it as looking like a human-sized bat with big bat wings on its back. All four took off as fast as they could go. More strange lights were seen in Sandlin Woods in the days that followed. Investigators found 3 giant footprints, an inch deep, 2 feet long, and 9 inches across. 3 weeks later, a group of people, including 2 newspaper reporters, visited the site and found the whole forest illuminated by a strange, pulsating light. Hello, fish. Auntie. They watched from a distance for half an hour, afraid to go closer. These great Garudas and winged beings are closely associated with luminous phenomena. They tend to appear in areas where UFOs have been active, and, like UFOs, they tend to linger for days or even weeks in the same specific area. The big luminous bird of the Illinois St. Louis region in 1948 was visiting an area of the Mississippi Valley that would see continuous UFO and hairy monster activity thereafter. In many instances, the witnesses have clearly seen the objects in the process of materialization or dematerialization. A glow is observed first, usually a reddish glow, marking the emergence of the object from the invisible band of the spectrum into infrared, and then into the narrow band of visible light. Or, if the object is passing through the visible band to the higher frequencies, it is cyan, bluish-green, before it fades into blue, hard to see at night, and then enters the ultraviolet range. The chills experienced by John Flaxton and his group were probably caused by microwaves above the infrared, which produces heat, just as the very cold atmosphere accompanying ghosts is a radiation effect. The absence of any overpowering odor, either sickly sweet like violets or roses, or nauseous like hydrogen sulfide, in these bird and Batman cases puzzles me, however. This could indicate some subtle difference in the basic structure of these creatures, a difference in the energy components or molecular structure. People are still seeing flying freaks. On May 21st, 1973, a group of men in a woods near Kristianstad, Sweden, reported an incredibly huge black bird, which passed within 100 feet of them. One witness had a camera with a telephoto lens and attempted to take a picture, but his film jammed. Camera malfunctions are remarkably common among would-be UFO photographers, and even those who try to take pictures of the serpent at Loch Ness. It almost seems as if some outside force fouls up cameras when monsters and UFOs are around. So that was Chapter 3 of the Mothman Prophecies. I'm going to take a quick break, but tell me what you think. I know it might be a little out of context without the first 2 chapters, but if you guys were around when I read them, then you'll get it, which I'd be happy about. So that chapter was all about winged weirdos, giant birds, birdmen, and strange, very physical men with odd, absurd flying contraptions. You know, a sampling of these going all the way back, which is interesting. If we're occultists, it's especially the account of, you know, the black winged woman seen by the soldiers in Vietnam. It reminds me of accounts of beings like the Lilitu from the Middle East, who, you know, are demigods or demons that were often winged women, sometimes depicted with bird feet, supposedly denizens of the underworld that would come out at night and, you know, do their thing or torment people or whatever. And those kinds of reports are pretty widespread in mythology and otherwise. Perhaps we can. So hold that thought, don't go anywhere, and let me know what you think in the comments. So, I don't have too many viewers tonight, so I don't know if I want to read Scarlet Gash, but I might read something else. I do want to read a little bit more of something before I go. Let's see what we got. So, the whole idea of the channeled readers and what they call like the starseed thing, which is kind of like a graduation of the indigo children. The idea is that they're, there's all these alien races that incarnate under this realm for that is a direct evolution of the contactee mythos that started in the 50s from direct contacts by people like George Adamski and others who encountered like these blonde Venusians who apparently just visit random people and they're like, hey, we come in peace, by the way, universal love, we all are one, stop using nukes. And like a new age is coming. Well, a new age did come. Now, it's interesting because I don't know how much I buy into the legitimacy of 1,000 interstellar weird aliens incarnating on this planet, but I do believe souls have different qualities to them. I tend to believe I kind of question that entire starseed thing, and not shitting on you or anything like that. I think maybe there's some good stuff in there. A lot of it seems to be a rehash of certain theosophical and mystical ideas that aren't really new. They're old, and now they are just kind of regurgitated into this whole like UFO, alien, extraterrestrial channel mythos. It's like just some very base, like similar concepts, just aesthetically designed, where now you don't have like gods with different spirits coming in. Now you have like Galactic Commander Ashtar and his mothership, and like the Pleiadians and Venusians and all these people, and it's interesting. But like as an occultist and somebody who's dealt with spirits and spirit work for a long time, I don't really see a difference in the entities. I think a lot of these channelers are channeling something. Like they do seem to be. I've even done a little divination towards it myself. They are encountering something, but whether those somethings are authentic or passing on worldviews that are actually match how reality works I'm questioning. Spirits lie. Maybe they don't even know they're lying. Maybe on some astral level that's what they are. Maybe, I don't know. But there certainly is a lot of contradiction mixed with true prophecy in the channeler culture going back 1950s. Like even the Mothman Prophecies will eventually go into that. With beings like Ashtar and Orthon and Valiant Thor. All of these are like named extraterrestrials that apparently appeared and interacted with humans. Like George Adamski he was like basically a cult leader, not in a negative sense really, but like he became so popular with his like messages from the Venusians that he traveled and met like royalty in Europe and stuff like that. So yeah, we can talk about Theosophy if you want. I don't mind. Like I don't have anything set to read, so I don't mind just talking and chatting on here. Whether if any of you guys want to hop on voice, I'll bring you in and you can share this video with me. Woo tube, yeah. But like I'm really interested in like kind of the underlying patterns you see behind a lot of this stuff, because despite the fact that I think that on some level reality is an infinitely big place filled with all kinds of weird shit, and that we can tune into any number of parts of it. Like I don't know, like the starseed stuff kind of strikes me as sketchy as shit. A lot of the new age stuff strikes me as sketchy as shit. Like I don't think all of it is. I don't think all of it's like destructive, but like there's that discernment that it's something fishy. Maybe it's not all bad, but like, if you research the old, really weird, absurd UFO contactee stuff, you'll find a pattern. And again, this is actually something John Keel goes into, and it kind of made him very critical of the entire phenomena. You'll discover a pattern where random people out of nowhere will have an encounter where an ET or an alien will just show up, and they'll come out of a flying saucer in somebody's like back fucking yard, and they'll just walk up to somebody and be like, "Hi, we come in peace, we mean you no harm, da 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 da. And they'll just have this communication, and a lot of times they'll invite people into their spaceships. And like they'll take in all these fucking planets that don't actually exist in the real world, like Indrid Cold and Woodrow Derenberger, who, you know, Indrid Cold took him on a spaceship supposedly multiple times, and he visited this planet called Lanulos in the galaxy of Ganymedes, which doesn't exist. There is a moon of Jupiter called Ganymede, but, you know, checking into the reports, something like that, like Woody thought that happened. Like, there were people who witnessed these so-called spacemen, even supposedly witnessed him going into spaceships with them. Like, I think people are encountering something, but my point is that you have a lot of random people, some of them more reliable witness-wise and some of them less, that they'll have an encounter experience. After that, their life will change. Oftentimes they'll be given some sort of prophetic information, or they'll be saying, you know, you're going to be our messenger to the world, and you're going to change the world and all this shit. And sometimes they'll be given prophecies. This happens with channeling a lot too. They'll be given really good functional data, really good functional shit, like, or like, you know, just new agey stuff that's kind of general when you pick it apart, like live in peace, you know, put love in your heart, rise above your lower natures, you know, we're all brothers and cosmic family, and, you know, stop doing evil, stop nuking each other, like. And then they'll be given, like, there's a couple reports, like, then it gets weird a lot of times. Like, you have these euphonauts who are like, you know, some people will go out and they'll start, like, cults, or they'll start communities, or they'll write these whole big books about these imaginative, ludicrous, you know, alien civilizations, and, like, all these messages of contact. Like, people used to write books and get them self-published, and, like, and each of them would describe the universe as, like, its own way, and they were all contradictory. But a lot of times they would actually have interesting, even prophetic data in them. Like, stuff that, you know, like, these aliens would give people, like, information that science wouldn't even discover later. Like, you know, scientific, like, astronomical data. And just enough to kind of make them legitimate. And oftentimes you'd see they'd start turning to, like, the end is coming. You need to prepare, and we're going to, like, pull you off the planet, or, you know, the chosen people are going to ascend, so you need to, like, be prepared for that. And it would sometimes get almost apocalyptic, or they would do things like, we're going to make ourselves known, we're going to contact the leaders, we're going to contact between humans and the ETs is going to happen on this date in this place, so you need to tell everybody. And, you know, the aliens would have a good track record of everything they said coming true. And, you know, you can look into this, like, you know, people are even like, there was one account where these supposed euphonauts predicted, like, there was going to be an assassination attempt on whatever pope was around in the 60s. Like, there was going to be, like, this riot in the Middle East, and then somebody was going to try to kill the pope, and, like, and there was going to be an earthquake right around the same time, and that shit actually happened, like, in order. Like, that happened, what they said. And then after that, it's like these people would trust them with their whole lives, and they'd invest their whole existence onto their wisdom. And then, you know, at the last minute, when the UFOs are supposed to come down and greet the president, and, you know, these people who are their mouthpieces have invested all their money in their lives, and, you know, a lot of times their families, like, a lot of them have a record of, like, losing their families, losing their, you know, all in. And then at the appointed time, nothing. They disappear. They wouldn't show up. Obviously, they wouldn't come down and meet the president. And a lot of times the people who were the original contactees would go fucking nuts. They'd go broke. They'd lose all their credibility because, you know, they're like, oh, the UFO believer cultist. But this happens a lot, where you have these benevolent euphonauts who, when they have contact with people, those people often, like, disappear. They die, like, randomly. They get in car accidents. You know, they slip in the fucking shower and break their neck, like, inordinately amount of time after a certain point. And so that is such a reoccurring thing of, like, you know, they give a little bit that's true, but then it often causes the downward spiral and destruction of those that they come into contact with, even the benevolent ones. So looking at, you know, I've probably read dozens of stories of people that you can look up on, like, fucking Wikipedia, that have supposedly had contact, and then they started groups or cults or written books and started giving these space people prophecies that later found in really bad ends. Like, they get divorced, they lose their kids, they commit suicide, they lose all their money, they look like fools. And time and time again, the space people were just vanished, like right at the last minute when they were needed to kind of prove it. Almost like that's when I say like trickster shit. Like, you have these, blonde Venusians, but it's trickster shit. Like, anybody who kind of does that work, like with trickster spirits or trickster gods, that's what it feels like. So, and it's often on another level, maybe even darker. It's a lot of the stuff in the New Age is the idea of give yourself, put all your faith and trust of your spiritual evolution in these ambiguous, higher dimensional space people. Yeah, exactly. And while the Christians think everything are demons, but there might be something to that as well. Whether they're actual demons or just whatever they are, a lot of it will have people. It's something, and this is my way I look at it. Like, I think when you're talking about spirits taking from humans or manipulating them, a lot of the end goal seems to be, I kind of almost want to say, they take their destiny. And that sounds a little weird, but it's almost like when you're dealing with a spiritual attack, or, a spirit kind of almost vampiric you in some way, like on a spiritual level. Like, if it's on a physical level, okay, like something hurts you. It's on a mental level, it can drive you nuts. But if something's a true, like, spiritual attack, which can usually only happen when you give it permission to, it's really important. Like, not many things can happen to your spirit unless you open the door to do so. Like, some glowy angel looking thing says, open your heart and shake my hand, and I'll give you enlightenment. And you're like, okay, I'll take the enlightenment. And it's like, well, all you have to do is let me chill in your body and destroy your ego, dissolve your ego, and fill yourself with the light. And I'm in the light, and I'll give you this enlightenment. And people are like, that sounds good, I like light, my ego's bad. Because everybody tells me my ego is bad. So they dissolve their sense of self, they destroy their psychic defenses, and they willingly allow an ambiguous, intelligent light to inhabit the empty space where a lot of the walls surrounding their heart went. And then they, not to say that they die, but like a lot of times they change. You get that like, peace is everything. Like, they lose their identity. And that's why I say, like, it feels like they steal destiny. Your destiny is, you're here in this life once. Like, this is your life. You have a set amount of time to do what you're going to do in it. Time's precious. Your will is precious. That is your divine right to have that. And if you spend 10 years of it obsessed over some manipulative spirit or force, that's 10 years that you could be doing your own will. That is a theft of destiny, in a sense. And I think on a spiritual level, that destiny is power. That's your power. That is your essence. That is not given to you. That has been manipulated out of you. And I think on a spiritual level, that has, like, almost maybe like food on a certain level of higher dimensional beings. It's like food for them. It's like, because they don't exist in causality, but they can take your time and your will, and for whatever reason. So that would be my slightly conspiracy theory, darky minded, spooky, but experience has shown that is sometimes the case. So I'm very wary of a lot of that starseed things, because I think the right direction that people should be looking towards in any kind of magical or spiritual training or journey or tradition should be not only the empowerment of self, but the acceptance of who you are, and having a handle on that, and understanding you have the power in you. It's all you. Like, you might have allies in spirit, and you'll know who they are because they won't ask you to give yourself up. They'll just support you, like your family does, like your friends do. On that level, they have your back, but they don't ask you to. They don't manipulate you. You know what I mean? Like, and that's really the thing. There's a lot of spiritual traditions and movements, like, say almost most of them on some level, ask you to give up yourself for this other self. that isn't you. And I rant about this all the time. So I think anything that asks you to do that, there's a difference between like giving up your ego and like, you know, growing as a person. There's some things, sometimes we are, you know, we live in a world surrounded by mental illness causing culture. Like, you know, people are wounded. They do have mental illness. And there is that. And there's a difference between healing on your own terms or increasing your knowledge and capacity and even your personality and identity. Like, humans, we are expansive. Everything we encounter allows us to grow on a spiritual level. Our heart just remembers everything. Our brains remember everything, and we adapt and internalize, and we become greater and more powerful on every level the more we experience and learn. That's not destroying your ego. You know, say if you have like a complex where you're like being a narcissist or something, like it's like an inversion of that process, but it doesn't mean you should be destroyed. It means you need to heal that part. And you have what it takes to heal that part in you. And there are forces in the universe that will help you heal it. There's a difference between being healed or having, you know, like any magician will tell you, like, you're not going to get too far without at least somebody having your back. But you don't need it. Like, I don't think you don't need it. Like, any magic you could do, you have it in you. Like, you are a product of source, of the highest. You are an extension of that on some level. And that means that you have that authority in you too. Doesn't mean you should, you know, it's right to use it to like be a control freak. That's the whole point. Is that when these things have these authoritarian, manipulative, like that programming that says you aren't good enough the way you are, so you need to be a different, better version that this tradition will give you or this spirit promises you, even if it's like coded in light. I will say this, probably the darkest things I've ever seen, like the truly most horrific spiritual things I've ever seen, have looked like angels. Like, straight up. They've looked like, well, mostly. I'll say a few of them. They have that, they come off. And there is something to that Christian idea that the devil lies. Not to say that I'm a Christian, but all belief systems have truth in them. And, like, just... there's a lot of humans in the world that are manipulative jackasses, and they'll fucking rob you of your money the moment you're there. Like, if you drop $20 on the ground, like, most people are just gonna take it. Fuck you. You know, if somebody thinks they could, you know, convince you to give them all the money in your wallet, a lot of people will be like, all right, if I don't get in trouble for it, sure. Like, nobody turns down a free lunch, and spirits aren't necessarily any different. They might not be evil, but you know, they might even on their notion think they're doing a good thing. You know, a mutually beneficial thing. Because spirits do grow with us. Like, they, you know, communication and relationships between humans and spirits should be mutually beneficial. Because they can evolve just as you do. And, you know, that's a whole thing. But discernment's real good. So my whole comment on like the star seeds and the contact T cults, they're kind of up there, like the channeled stuff. Like, I'm sure some of them are powerful, but like a lot of the channelers don't really do any kind of, they have not developed a magical discernment. Most of them don't have any magical technique or skill. They kind of like don't really have a way to validate what they are dealing with. Like, it'll like, because spirits can feel your intent. They kind of want to say, from my experience, from how I come to know it, spirits see your intent in a lot of ways. They see it, like they see your form, but like your physical body is secondary to like what your heart is saying, to what you are putting out. So if you were like, if your whole aura is like, I want to know and I want to talk, because a lot of people, and I don't mean this in a bad way, a lot of people who do like channeling culture stuff, they're lonely and they have sometimes self-esteem problems, and they want to be important. They want to help. A lot of times they come from traumatic backgrounds, so their empathy is turned up to 5 degrees up, because overactive empathy can be a trauma response, and they admit it. Like, that's a thing. Like, I just saw a post in this Starseed group that I just kind of float around because I like to watch them. Is like, there was a post like, I feel like all people who come from a trauma background are all starseeds. Do you think we're all starseeds? And like, people are like, oh yeah, that's like a thing because we don't get along in the world that well. Or you could look at it that people coming out of that background, like a lot of people endure trauma, but they come out and their empathy is up. So they kind of have that discernment. There's also that mechanism that is really open, where it's closed off to humans. They open it up to spirit because they need that spiritual healing. But, if a rando spirit comes by, they just see this like, come talk to me, come be my friend. And there's no guarantee like a spirit that comes up to you is gonna really, like, again, from that spirit's perspective, it might think it's doing a good deed, but it might just be like, but I might eat anyway. Like, I want this vessel. Spirits a lot of them like to get their, whatever they're about, out into the world. And sometimes those messages aren't bad. Like, a lot of the contact he called stuff, a lot of it's like, hey, you guys should love each other and stop being dicks. There's not really anything wrong with that. It's only dangerous when people start sacrificing themselves for a disembodied entity. And because that's, in my opinion, they don't. Like, not all spirits are angels, and a whole dimensions of magic can be transactional, where spirit does you a favor, you give the spirit some incense, or a little sacrifice, or you just, make it some art, or, things like that. Nothing wrong with like a little give and take, but there's a give and take. And those spirits don't need you to hollow out your soul for them. So it's something you kind of like, the more you look into it with a really open mind, like kind of a discernment, and saying, okay, what's really going on here? Because everything in the universe that can talk shit, straight up. Anything can talk shit. But in my experience, beings who are really your allies, and they are there, like I consider a lot of angels being like that. Like, for instance, like big archangels like Michael and Raphael, like I've never encountered, like I work with them a lot, and I've never encountered that transactional nature at all in them, for instance. Like, there's never any of that manipulation. I've never been asked to do something like give up this, even. Like, literally the only vibes I've ever gotten for those angels is they're there every time I need them, and I call them, and they just kind of like, they're just kind of like doing their thing, and they're like, hey, kind of like, I hope you're good today. I got you. Like, if you need my help, I got you. That's what we're here for. Like, straight up, this is what we're here for, and we love you, and we have your back. We're your allies. There was never any question of like, we'll have your back if you do this for us, or we'll have your back if you change this part of you. Never. Even when I felt like shit and I was like drinking too much and being a whole sloppy, shitty, bitter person, they were just like, we hope you feel better. That was the vibe. Like, you are just, where you want to be, but we're here when you need us. And like, I got the sense that those kinds of spirits, they don't even see that darkness too much. They just see your heart. You look like a little like, you're like this little spark. And I imagine it to like, almost like when we see like an innocent little kid happy and playing and laughing, like as an adult, like it warms our heart, and we're just like, oh, like that's awesome. That's like I feel like that's how certain angels see us, but not all spirits are like that. Some of them are far closer to our world, and some of them are pieces of shit spirits, and some are manipulative and whatever. And then some spirits are totally fucking alien. Like, I can't say. I don't know all the kinds of spirits or whatever either. But when you work in the occult and you work with spirits and you meet a lot of people and do a lot of stuff, you do notice patterns, and you do notice like what seems to kind of be going on beyond what any given spirit or channeler might tell you. And to carry it back to the euphonauts and these like peace-loving Venusians, like there is a track record of basically, these people who really want to be important, they really want to have a connection with spirit. They're approached by these supposedly good-natured, powerful, higher dimensional alien spirit beings, etheric beings or whatever, because most of them don't think they're actually, like a lot of the starseed folks, they kind of think that these aliens are like the Pleiadians and stuff. They usually look, from what I understand, they look at them as physical ETs, but also like etheric beings. So like in their minds, they're a mix between like spirits and aliens, literally. And like, I guess when you get right down to it, I'm really interested in seeing like, I want to know the different types of beings in the universe and what they are and how they're different from each other. Like, that's just my interest. But they are, a lot of these contactee people and channels do seem to be connecting with some sort of intelligence that, because there is evidence that like the same entities are appearing to different people who don't even know each other, and they have a unique personality, they have a unique voice. Not all of them are evil. Like, I did a divination session on several of them for my own curiosity, like last week, specifically on like a galactic commander Ashtar. There's a very famous channeled UFO entity, like supposedly like this great commander of light he's like all these higher dimensions above us, and he's captain of this galactic federation. It's like weird UFO stuff, but. And I kind of walked into that divination saying, I wonder what is behind that. Like, I wonder what sort of like weird fucking alien thing is behind that face that all these channelers are, and I, checked out a few, because there's channel videos on Ashtar and like people channeling his messages and like, but I'll be honest, I was actually proven wrong by that. Like, I'm not saying that Ashtar is actually a galactic alien, but doing a divination on that spirit, I actually didn't get any negativity or malice out of it. It did seem to be a rather powerful spirit in its own right, or his own right, that actually was helpful and people were being helped by in like a good way. Like, it wasn't a malicious force, it was a benevolent one. Whether it's true intentions behind everything, usually when I do divinations I can pick out the true intentions behind everything. And even then he seemed to be kind of like a solar being. Maybe my best guess is that type of being like that is, I don't want to say an intermediary spirit, but a powerful quasi-divine spirit that might have held a different role in a previous time. Like Ashtar, for instance, of course, is actually a Mesopotamian god going way back, like and is a male form of Astarte and Astaroth. Like that's like one of the OG love and war deities of Mesopotamia and Sumer and Babylon. Inanna is a form of that. Inanna, Ishtar, Ashtar, Astarte, Ashtar. A lot of those gods and goddesses, they shift genders too, depending on what city they are in. Ashtar is literally a Mesopotamian god. And now then this alien calling itself Ashtar, this blonde-haired, beautiful being who is helping people and like, helping them heal and doing all this stuff and doing spiritual work. Like, I don't know, maybe he is. Like, I took a little win and I kind of opened up to that energy and I didn't feel anything bad from it. But I walked into that divination actually suspecting it to be some sort of like Lovecraftian demon. And like, but it does seem to be different from the god. Like, I did it and I was like, is there a difference between Ashtar Shedden, the channeled alien, and like the god Ashtar? And I kind of got a response that was like, sort of. So that's an interesting, like, talking about divination. Sometimes the answers you get they give you more information than the question you asked. Like, because that kind of suggests a relationship between very different spirits that hold a name and like, you guys get what I'm saying, but that's a different subject altogether. I am a Lovecraftian demon, but I'm hydrating. I'm a hydrating Lovecraftian demon. But you know what? I try not to judge. There's a lot of interesting spirits and forces in the universe, and a lot of them can help us. And you never know. Maybe it was just a random spirit that was empowered by all these starseed cults, and we can influence spirits too. Like, if we throw our intent at them enough and there's enough heart in them, like, there's no sense you can't see a spirit becoming kind of a spirit of light in that sense. And a lot of, even going to the UFO phenomenon and the cryptids and spirits, there is a pattern that when they take a form, and this form has like a story around it, like, UFOnauts appear and they appear as like these little tiny scientists. It seems to be that those beings, even if they're only temporary, like a manifestation of a greater intelligence, which is what a lot of the UFOnaut shit points towards, like, whatever those beings think they are or present themselves to be, once they're incarnate or vaguely incarnate, they become that. Like, they believe it. Like, in the sense, it's almost like they're creating like a temporary incarnation, and like there's a small story. It's like almost like they have to write themselves a story to be in the greater story of reality, and then that is part of their identity. Like if they appear, even if for only like 10 minutes, to a couple farmers in Illinois, and these beings are like, oh, we're from this planet of whatever, and we're here to collect flowers and tell you that you should not use nuclear weapons, and they just say a bunch of random ass shit that doesn't make any sense. It's almost like those entities on a level believe that is true for them, because there are accounts of like weirdos and Men in Black type phenomena, like these vaguely real but physical beings that people have encountered. Many people have encountered them, sometimes with like multiple witnesses, and sometimes reoccurringly. Like some of these phenomena even like make phone calls. They call people and people they had contact on the fucking phone, or pull up in cars when they're walking down the street, and weird shit. Like it's on a level of really weird, not completely dreamlike, where there are people get in these cars of these supposed like Men in Black, or these like UFO occupants that are like dressed like humans, and they will just have these weird relationships with them for a long time. And like people like John Keel and others have like, who have encountered them personally, have thrown those questions of like kind of poking holes in their very identity, and they kind of like, the reports you get in, it's really, they almost get confused. Like they're not, it's almost like they're a program that exists here, and they have a very small framework and a story, but if like you break out of that, they don't really kind of become disjointed. It's really fucking weird, fascinating stuff. Like almost like tulpas. And there's theories that they're like tulpas, that they're temporary manifestations of like an idea or a spirit. And in that way, I guess you would say that they are maybe not all spirits themselves, but a spiritual or energetic intelligence might manifest them, like kind of like we do with a thought form, but into our reality to do something. Like there are countless Bigfoot, hairy monster cryptid reports, and several people will see like this fucking monster out in the middle of nowhere, something like crossing somebody's farm field, or they see him in the woods, and enough where whole towns of people have witnessed these monsters, and they have like glowing green eyes, and they usually have like the smell of sulfur around them. And like they're for the hairy monsters, for instance, use a pendulum, how this doesn't dangle perfectly. I think T's right on the terms of the pendulum stuff. Like once you can get it to swing yes or no, it's all uphill from there. The more you work with it and the more you connect with that, that's kind of what I'm going to do with my pendulum work, to kind of like give like little lessons to people who want to know like how to take it from the yes-no stage, the little wobble, to you are fully communicating with the little spirit that lives in this stone on a conversational level, where you'll the little ways it moves, like it's have personality, kind of going from this is a tool that I can get to move sometimes, to like an ally that has its own mannerisms and body language and personality, so to speak, that you can communicate with like any other spirit, if you do mentally or otherwise, that can thus, being a spirit, do things spirits can do, and they can help you out and aid you, and they can also act as intermediaries to other spirits. And like I said, possibilities be endless, but it does take practice. And I will say not only practice, but I know where I got to where I was with my pendulum, in that it took a while, and there was a lot of emotional investment too, and it was very personalized. And the more personalized and invested I got, it happened naturally. But I think you could engineer it with intent without too much problems. So, hold on. Scrolling. But yeah, most people do pendulums, and they do a yes, no, maybe for direct answers. The way I do it is kind of, again, it's, looking at the pendulum is kind of, you could look at it as a spirit. If you choose to, you could look at it as a piece of your consciousness or a piece of your will that acts autonomously, almost like a thought form or a tulpa in itself that dwells in your tool, or in yourself that acts through the tool. But it can and does act as a separate voice aside from your conscious mind that will have total access to your unconscious self too. And essentially, like, if you're on that level with it, it has perfect understanding and knowledge of all spiritual systems in you as well. And if you give it a method to communicate that data, like I draw my own systems, I make my own pendulum charts, sometimes even like circles, and I just do different conversational phrases. Like, once you are able to get that data and you're confident enough to do so, and you have a strong enough tool or spirit that can do it for you, then really the sky's the limit. Like, you can do that. It's just a matter of, like, I've found that for me and a lot of people, they don't use pendulums, which is a very direct form of scrying. That in some ways, I'm not going to say it's better than tarot or better than like scrying in a crystal ball. It's different. It's a different kind of brain, side of your brain that's being used, sort of. Actually uses both pretty well, because the pendulum's just a secondary thing. And I'll be honest, like a lot of things, you won't actually need it after a certain point if you choose not to. But that point is pretty far and it's advanced. Like, you can develop your own psychic abilities and your own discernment, and just literally you'll pick up the ability to understand how spirits communicate, and your own intuition, and separate your own thoughts and jumbles from, like, this is a directed message. Like, you'll actually feel the difference after a while, like, in your mind. And you can do that very simply, like what I'll do, and every once in a while I'll practice with my pendulum in her state as a spirit, like as her own autonomous being. Like, they will attempt to communicate you in your mind if you ask them to, and they'll usually do it through feelings, or like a mix of intent and visualizations, sometimes words. And a lot of times you don't think about it because you're just in imagination land all day. Like, meditation can help with that. I'm bad at it traditionally, but meditation can help with that because you are learning how your brain works on that level, on a very, like, you'll know what your thoughts are because you'll have better control and understanding. And, like, I want to use the term vibes here. Like, each different thought pattern, each source has a very subtle difference in feeling. Almost like when you encounter different people, each person has a very slightly unique feeling to them. Spirits are the same way. And when you start paying attention to that, you can do it. So when I kind of started to break my own walls down, or, before it's like, oh, that's silly. Like, I told myself I couldn't do a lot, specifically with a pendulum and other things, for literally no reason. I just had these assumptions that it couldn't be done or I couldn't do it. And I don't know why. And I was like, well, why not? And so I learned most of my stuff by saying, I don't care. Like, I'm just going to have fun. It's just me and my stone here in the basement, and I'm just going to have fun. Who cares? Like, I had these excuses of, like, well, I must use it for a spiritually important task. Why? No reason to do that. I must, I do all these rituals to blessing to make sure the communication is strong. Okay, sure, sometimes, but, like, it's me in my space. Like, I know what bad spiritual communication is. And, there was always like, well, you can't use it for these, like, silly things. That you have to follow this, like, new agey schema, and yes or no. And I was like, it's not even useful. Like, it's so limiting. So I was like, I'm just going to start playing. And I was like, I'm not going to explain what I did, but, like, I just draw up charts, and I'd, like, ask people, like, what do you think about this? Like, in a conversational way. Like, she was my, like, little friend after a while. I'm like, and then I realized, like, sometimes we lie to ourselves. So I'd be like, I'd pick out, like, people on, like, Facebook, like, Ian, how do I feel about this person, really? And then, like, I'd have my emotional chart, and it would go, and I'm like, that's true. Or, like, and then it'd be like, how does this person feel about that person? Like, it was stupid just playing around, and making systems to say, like, okay, like, and I used to do it with, like, tabletop game systems. That's where I kind of, like, got a lot of ideas for my system, where I'm like, you know what, I have this little number chart hemisphere, like, pendulum, you have access to the entirety of my subconscious database. You have access to it. They're like a badass little AI. Like, your brain is a computer, most of which your conscious is like an interface. But the vast majority of you is like this giant internal database that is potentially infinite in scale and connects with the universe itself. So your pendulum is like a little AI bot that is a part of you, but also, like, distinct from you, that literally it's like a familiar. It's like a little librarian bot that can go, oh, yeah, I can find that info for you. You know it already. And that's a lot of it. Like, it can get access information that you don't know, but we know a lot more than we realize we do. Anytime we see information anywhere, our brain records it. It's there. And our brain is also unconsciously connecting all those lines. Usually that will come out in behavior and nature. Like, instincts will come out in that way. And you know, like, we don't even think about it, but like, you know, we know, like, we are intaking so much more info than we realize. That all adds up and it all connects and relates to each other in our brain. Our brains are fucking cool as shit, without even adding the spiritual element and the magical element to that. But so your pendulum can literally just like, okay, like, it has access, and not only does it have access to the raw data of all the things you know, but it also knows your intent. Like, it can read your intent. It knows your intention when you mean, like, when I say, you know, something I'll do, pendulum's like, all right, you know, I'll write down a bunch of spirits, and like, here's one, because there's a lot of confusion between like the idea of a daimon and a demon. Like, what is a demon? I classify an actual demon, D-E-M-O-N, as a corrupted or malicious evil entity. Like, something is destructive and hateful and just not really redeeming in that sense. Like, they are, in a sense, like, you know, evil fucking spirits. As opposed to, and there's a lot of spirits that are called demons because, you know, they were written about in the Middle Ages when everything that wasn't an angel or God was a demon, and they'd burn you at the stake or fucking hang you if you wrote a book about that in another way. So like, the grimoires are talking about just rando nature spirits, and they're like, oh, demons, and they're like archdukes of hell. Like, actually, like, that spirit was probably just like the god of a copse, like, of part of a forest or something, or like of a river, or like the god of a certain, or like an ancestor that somebody had in Roman times. You don't know. But like, before I carry on, but like, you know, sometimes like I've studied like different Goetia spirits, and like I like to figure out what spirits actually are, because there's a lot of obfuscation. And so like, one of the things like is a general kind of thing. Like, I put a bunch of spirits, and like, is this spirit demonic? When I say that, already me consciously doesn't like the idea of that, because I don't have a full definition of what that means. But I do have the intent to what that definition. Like, I know in my heart, through all my experience through magic, that there is a classification, as kind of vague as it is, to how I would define demonic, and also what my intent on demonic is, and how kind of the universe views it. So like, the pendulum can take that, not only your understanding, but your intent on what you are meaning on a true level, and get you, if you are developed enough, and the pendulum spirit is developed enough, it can say, I understand what you mean. Like, Alexa gets it. It's way better than Alexa. Like, you know, if you're like, you know what, there's this song in the tip of my tongue. Like, if you have a pendulum that can work on that level, like, there's a song that's it'll fucking, if it had every fucking song ever and it could point to it, it could just, I got you. I know what you mean. Like, your subconscious already knows. Your conscious mind just forgets. So that's the real power you have in that. Like, the more you know, the more data you have and experience, the more you can do with pendulum stuff. Because pendulums can draw data from the aether, sure. But how to translate that raw data into something you understand that is meaningful, that is where you, being experienced and knowledgeable, comes in. Because you have this whole database in you of all the occult books you read and all the experiences and even stuff you didn't realize you learned. Like, that pendulum can just analyze it instantly and say, oh, I got your intention, because they're not really robots. They understand what you mean. Like, I'd be telling you, like, oh, I get you. Like, you're trying to articulate a concept, and like, trying to articulate this concept, but I can't really find a word for it. But, you know, you were doing that, and I got what you meant. I know what you're talking about. And I'm like, oh, yeah, it's this. Pendulum does that too, but it has, like, picture doing that with a total access of every bit of knowledge you had, comparatively and contrasted, all at an instant. So, you know, pendulum's like, I know what you mean when you say, it's this, whether these beings are objectively on some divine level designated as demon, it's not the point. Like, the qualities and qualifications and that I've kind of made in my mind over 30 years based on education and experience has painted a picture of kind of like a box of what could be included in a demonic idea of a spirit. So I'll go and like some things surprise me, like on a conscious level. Like I'll be like, you know, a lot of the Goetia, for instance, like I've did divination on some of the standard Solomonic Legematon Goetia, the 72 spirits, 72 or 77, 72. It's, you know, like, hey, you know, people think they're like demons. A lot of them do not come up that way. Like just direct divination questions like, hey, is Stolas a demon? Like, I don't know if Stolas a demon, but sometimes, no, not really. It doesn't come up with that category that my mental framework has, you know, made demonic. He's not. But then, like Astaroth, for instance. Astaroth's not a demon. Astaroth comes up as like a deity. But in that question form, however, like, let me think. Vague conceptual spirits like Klipoth cortexes. I'm talking about like the Tree of Death, which is probably didn't even know about that. Or a couple of the Goetia do come up that way. Just random stuff like, you know, I have certain things like, no, that's definitely would be category demon. But this is just an example of how you can set your own terms and variables, whether numerically or through words or concepts. You do your pendulum. You can write down, like, get over the idea that what you're doing is silly. Your connection to your pendulum and the spirit grows exceptionally higher if you're having fun, if you are playing. Like, spirits grow close to you when you play with them, and they become vibrant. Like, when I realized my pendulum was becoming autonomous, I made the decision to, like, I was like, you know what? Once I realized it was a being in its own right, like, I was like, you know what? I'm just going to come at you with, yeah, you got me. I'm fucking, there you go. See, exactly. That's my point T. Like, I had the word, you knew what I meant. You knew what I meant, even though I didn't state it. And that's exactly the point I was making before about what the pendulum could do when you throw your intent out. So, like, one of the things I do, and it's kind of weird, like, you can write just random words and, like, in a circle and just hold your pendulum and talk to it. Like, you know, what do you think about this? Treat it like a person. You don't have to always be getting, you know, world-changing final things. You're not on a time... Here's some things to remember. You're not on a time limit. It's not that fucking serious. The world doesn't depend on you doing divination. You're not going to anger anything, and you're not going to waste anything's time. Time is very timey-wimey, wibbly-wobbly. Like, especially from spirit's angle, like, it just works differently. And if you have here's something to remember too. You're thinking you're ever like, once you realize that the spirit is not just you, then if you're anything like me and kind of a nice person or empathic, you might have that psychological little twerk that makes you kind of like not want to bother it, because you know you don't want to like put other people out. And generally be nice to them. Be like, oh, I hope I'm not bothering you with this. That's what happened to me, and I realized I was doing it. I was like, man, do a pendulum. And then I asked. I was like, I'm kind of like having a weird insecurity about bothering the spirit in my pendulum. I feel a little schizophrenic, not going to lie. But now that I realize you're a person, I don't want to be rude to you. And it's got this answer like, you're good. You can bother me all day. It's what I'm here for. Like, you don't. It's not annoying. I don't get bored. I'm not going to get frustrated. Like, that was a very clear response. You're like, you're good. But it's interesting. Like, you can build up almost your communication skills with spirits when you realize that, like, you could talk to them like people, and you'll develop a relationship with them that is functional like people. They're not people, but some of them are kind of like people. And I said, like, if you have a pendulum, likely it's a stone or metal, which is derived from stone. My working educated theory is that, for instance, my pendulum is an amethyst, and she chose her name as Amethyst. They're not always super complicated. Usually when they become self-aware enough to understand that they could be named, then it's literally like, well, I guess my name is what I am. They're not going to make some weird like fantasy, like, Ixtherion the Black. No, they're just like, well, I don't know. Never been named before. I guess my name is, I'm an amethyst, so that's my name. It works. That seemed right. But I don't even know where I was going with that. I got like Ixtherion the Black or something. I think that was the name of like a D&D dragon. But my brain farted. I guess the point is, where I'm going to backtrack a little bit, is just the more you just communicate with your stone, the more your... Oh, yeah, I was saying, like, you're ever worried about making your spirits impatient or how they perceive time? Or a lot of people can be like, well, I'm afraid I don't want it to get dirty, or like the spirit inside it to get like corrupted, or get any bad energy in it. Once in a while that might be a thing, but 9 times out of 10 that's just horseshit. Like, your pendulum, if it's a rock or a stone or a crystal, is a crystal. It's a rock. It has been in existence for likely millions of years in some form. And that consciousness is literally the consciousness of that stone. Now, as I was told, like, my amethyst crystal is a shard of a bigger amethyst geode. And you kind of have to accept a philosophical animism as kind of like an understanding. You have to have either a weird psych model of the universe could work, but really an animistic view of things will benefit you, because that is kind of what the reality of that is pointed to, that everything has a bit of consciousness in it. Everything in existence does, on its own level, in its own way. Some way similar to us, in some ways very alien. But like, so this amethyst was once just an amethyst node, and it had a spirit, or it has a spirit, and it's it. When it broke or became into shards or was split up, like, it's still the spirit of that amethyst, but it's like almost, I don't want to say like children, but like it's like little pieces of that consciousness all break up and become kind of unique. And it sounds a little like Wookiee, but I think they consider it amongst themselves almost like familial, like brothers and sisters. Like, as soon as they become distinct, they relate to each other kind of like how we'd relate to family, but in a different way. Maybe like a colony, I don't know. But you kind of get my intention there. That's because I've asked, I'm interested. I'm like, well, it sounds like a silly question for people who are like super practically minded in their magic, and they just care about like results all the time. Like, I'm actually really interested in like the dynamics and the ecology of, like, when I'm talking to an autonomous entity that is in existence, and it has just as much existence as me, then I want to know all about it. Nobody else asks these questions. I don't find any fucking books where somebody asked how the spirits of different stones that broke off from the original stone personally feel about the other stones. Like, that's cool. You learn a lot from asking it. So I did. And that's kind of what I got. They're like, I asked questions like, are you lonely? And they're like, no. Like, stone spirits have personalities that you would think a stone spirit has. A lot of times the intuitive answer is very simple, and it's pretty right. Like, stone spirits, they're old, they have patience, they don't have the same idea of boredom and frustration as we do, because we're very quick, anxiety-ridden, fleshy existences as humans. So we have that, like, we gotta get it done now, we got a lot of shit to do today. They are literally stones. That is what they are. No more, no less. It's just you're communicating with the consciousness of it. So, but what's interesting is that once you breach communication with that, little animistic spark of amethyst, or whatever stone you're using, or whatever material you're using, even it's like a metal, or even plastic perhaps, but though I tend to think crystals have specific, different stones and crystals have different properties, and if you utilize them as a pendulum, and that spirit is strengthened, it will express those qualities differently. Different pendulums will be better at different things and worse at different things. Like, my pendulum, she's not very good at finding lost objects, but I used to have one that was. And like, there are ways to find lost objects through energy or psychism or magic. Sure. Light a candle to St. Anthony, I guess. I think he's the one. But like, she's not very good at it. Like, I used to try to have her find lost objects, and she'd be really gung-ho about it, but she was wrong. But when it came to like other things like spirit work, things like therapeutic work, things like reading the connections between things and people and emotions and things like that, phenomenal. Like, ridiculously phenomenal. Every time I demonstrated it to a person, practically, like, usually every time I've let somebody with any kind of psychic or magical sense hold my pendulum, for instance, they've just been like, oh, that's cool, and they're like, whoa, like, it gives them a little shock. They're like, that's a lot of power. Or they'll notice, like, I've never felt something like that. I got a guy who sold pendulums in a shop. He's like, I've never felt like a pendulum like that. Like, there's a spiritual like force in it. Like, I feel it. a certain way. I was like, yeah, she's a powerful spirit. And that's my point. Like, when you, it's not just a tool, like it is, but the more you work with it, the more of your will and the more you communicate innocently, playfully, when you lose that pretension of there's a certain rigid way to do this, like once you just like let that shit go and you just like, I'm having fun, I'm like looking up like silly shit, like the more silly, absurd, fun, random stuff you do over time, you just build that personal connection like you do with a good friend. And I hate to say it, but it's kind of nerdy. I don't hate to say it, but here you go. Like a good example is like, think of like Pokemon, like they do in like the Pokemon show, when like, you know, they're, you know, you have the master and then you have their Pokemon, and they have like, that's like their friend, like their special Pokemon, and they have that like really intimate, close, kind of loving, you know, really loving relationship between like the Pokemon trainer and the Pokemon, like Ash and Pikachu or whatever. And like where they are kind of emotionally connected, and it's like an animal. Like Pokemon are kind of like spirits anyway. It's like a cartoon basically that reskinned. It could easily be a good way to look at, you know, kind of how spirits are. They're like kind of fantastical beasts that aren't really animals, that have kind of archetypical and sometimes elemental associations and da-da-da. So it's not really that different. It sounds like it is. And I love, video game, talking about magic in video game terms, I love annoying mainstream traditional occultists who have to have everything in a very serious box. Usually they're the history wankers. I love history, so don't get me wrong. They're like the history wankers. Like, oh, if it didn't appear in this grimoire, it's probably bullshit. Like, I just love talking about like actual functional magic and like nerdy ass shit. Like, man, it's the old chaos magician in us, you know what I mean? But honestly, like video games and tabletop stuff, like those things have inspired some really potent shit, including certain divination methods. As kind of like, the thing is, like, people forget, everything in reality holds essence. It's all equal. All media is equal. We personally attribute importance or ludicrousy to any given media, but objectively, nothing is greater or worse than anything else. It serves its purpose, it all has its function, and it's all inspired on some level. It's all a vehicle, if it's needed to be a vehicle, for spiritual, divine, or psychologically reflective inspiration. So a human mind can create a system using the logic behind calculus or geometry, or a language like Hebrew, and when invested with enough meaning and interconnections and built upon, you can build a house with anything. You can build that and it'll start describing reality in its own unique lens. You can do the same thing with like tabletop game logic, where you have these people who are trying to create an imaginary world with a bound set of rules that are contained to make that world consistent. So usually a tabletop game, for instance, why I love it, and I kind of like developed an entire divination system using pendulum, not saying it's based on like tabletop, but like fucking around with tabletop rules inspired it. So I took some stuff from there. You're making this internally consistent imaginary game that's trying to its best to replicate a real world, so to speak, like an imaginary fantasy real world that has consistent rules, where like in D&D, like you have 6 attributes. So like you have your strength, your dexterity, constitution, your intelligence, your wisdom, and your charisma. And like everything statted out, like every living thing in the game is based on this system of like everything has some level of these 6 attributes, and they define it. So they have this internally consistent rule system to let this imaginary world be described in, to exist within its confines. It has a law. So basically the idea of the law, capital L, and magic, like the law is really fucking important. It allows reality to be consistent unto itself. So reality has to have laws, and spiritual and otherwise, physics, just in material, like laws of physics, that allows the universe to be functional as it is. If we had another universe with different physics, that would be a very different universe. change the laws, the whole chaos takes a different shape. So, like, talking about tabletop games, like, you know, they defined, like, these attributes, strength and dex and all that. Like, there are a number between 1 and whatever. Or 1 is, like, the lowest. Like, something with a, for instance, just to be nerdy, like, you have a human. And they've defined as the average human peasant, normal fucker, would have, like, 10 in each of these attribute scores. 10 is just, like, base-ass average. You ain't special, you don't suck. And it's kind of looked through the lens of a human. And then you have, like, it's a fantasy game, so you have, like, minotaurs, bears, and Greek gods and shit. Cthulhu. Like, everything can be... So they define it, so you have these base average, where somebody had, like, a 1 in strength, they were pretty much paraplegic. Like, they had no muscle, they couldn't move at all. If that is 0 in it, that means they couldn't, they didn't have a strength at all. And then it's been defined, you take a tabletop game and other writers add to it and develop it, and the more material you have, the more monsters are created, the more humans, examples of specific humans are created, are like, and as those little arbitrary numbers were, well, 10 in each score is a base human, that's the conceit, then... You know, you're saying, okay, well, what does that mean exactly? They're just numbers that you're telling us, but that doesn't mean anything. So to define meaning, this is, again, look at it in a magical context, look in a Kabbalist context. Like, things are just shells. They're just empty media. It's just thoughts that are consistent with each other, but without meaning, without depth, without reflection with other things inside its own system, they don't mean shit. Like, I could say, well, a human with strength 10 is an average human, and that would be nothing. Most people who don't play tabletop games, they'd be like, okay, what the fuck does that mean? However, if you understand the system, you're like, well, okay, so what about a human with a strength of 16? And then I look at the book and it's like, well, a strength of 16 would designate, like, a weightlifter. Somebody who goes to the gym all the time and they fucking pump weights, and they kind of, like, got big arms and shit. Like, that would be a strength. Like, the book actually, I'm thinking of a book where it actually says that. Or, like, in World of Darkness, because you guys like World of Darkness, like, all the stats are, like, 1 to 5, where 1 is, like, one strength would be, like, sniveling weakling, or 5 would be the peak. It's defined as the peak human capability. So now, the idea here, we have these, you know, endpoints. You have a min-maximum, and within that, you have... in these 5 little dots in this tabletop game, this, you know, you could play and make this fantasy world that's internally consistent. You have these bounded notions. So all humans in the whole planet are going to be between 1 and 5. So, like, a 5 is going to be, like, you know, there's, like, world champion weightlifters, Olympic athletes, stuff like that. So point is, so you have, like, a 16 strength human, and that is, and if you guys are joining, you're probably like, what the fuck is he talking about? But that is defined as, say, like, a weightlifter, somebody who's, like, you know, works their muscles out. An 18 strength human is defined as an Olympic athlete, somebody who's the peak human condition, again. So not only, I gave you 2 systems of tabletop, of their internal logic, where World of Darkness, you have the same scale of imaginary human being described in this system, between 1 and 5. D&D, you have, you know, 1 and 18. So it's larger, but it's still symbolically describing information that your brain understands. You know what that means. And it's general, it's vague, but it's universal. So they're just they're just symbols, just like anything else. They're just symbols that are describing an abstract concept. Now, that is a really important notion. And these abstract concepts, symbols, language, gains meaning by the more it defines reality, the more information it can compare to every other bit of information. That is like the fucking web. That's like Indra's fucking net. It's that everything is defined by being compared to everything else. Its essence isn't necessarily defined, but it is rationally in the Ruach defined as, and you can learn about that by comparison. So any system can be created on this level, as long as you put it down enough. Like, and that's, you know, I have several that I've spent time defining. So, like, but what is talking about the human of the strength 16, the strength 18. So then it's a fantasy world. So you gotta have monsters in it, right? So they're like, okay. And you also have, like, real world animals, things like that. And you're like, okay, well, how much stronger is, like, you have this idea of a human, and he's got like, say he's a big, strong 16 human. They're like, well, how does that compare to like a silverback gorilla or a lion? Well, again, these are symbolic things, and it's not going to be totally literal, but the main intent is there. So we could go, and these guys who've made these games just have, they're fucking nerds, so they have gone out and researched exactly like how strong on average a silverback gorilla is, or a gorilla is, compared to like a human being. And because everything's a little different, a lot of these rely on kind of an idea of averaging out. And again, when you do pendulum work and you want to kind of like get information, oftentimes if you put the thought in your head that like a generalized average of all potentials for your answer, as close as you can to the idea you want, will get you pretty far if you're trying to find data, because the universe isn't constant. Like even particles, and particles are never still. You can't really, nothing is just an absolute certain state. So if you get in your head to start working and asking questions on this level, like when you're doing divination, it's kind of like, I want to know about this person, I want to know about this person, and you kind of put that out and you use the pendulum and you gain data. Just put in your mind that like, I want the closest closest idea to what this person is, then you can find it like in this day or within this week. And you should get a result that's more or less the average of, it's hard to explain unless you're doing it, but like the average of all the potential information in that time frame. Otherwise your default will be immediately right now. So you're like, I don't know, some stupid silly question like, quantify the luck around some person, like around a random human that you think about, like how much fortune or good magic is around that person right now. Quantify into a number between 1 to 5. Pendulum, do so. And then you say, okay, I want to, you'll get the immediate answer of right now as you ask the question, and instantaneously you'll have the idea of what that means. Because like when you say, how much luck does somebody have? That's a really kind of weird, silly question, but in your heart you have an idea of what luck means, and your pendulum can translate that for you. So it's going to take the closest approximate definition in a real functional sense at the direction you're pointing at, and it's going to give you as closest it can to a serious answer. And if it's something that's totally out there, it'll just be like, no, you're stupid. Like that doesn't exist. Sometimes that happens, but if it can be extended, like if I can say, because I have to say like how much luck is around you. I don't use that term in real life, but you could say like how beneficial is someone's fate? All the little different variables of, maybe they have cool spirits backing them up. Maybe they have fate on their side. Maybe they're following their will. Maybe they've just physically thrown all their ducks in a row. I don't know. It's like an ephemeral concept, but some people do seem to have better luck than others. And we could run on the idea of it being true, even if we don't know the actual details of how luck works, or if it even works. But the intent of what we're talking about definitely is describing some process that we can observe. So we throw that through our pendulum, we ask, we kind of let the definitions be nebulous, and then we take the data that comes back and we can put it. So you do it and you're like, okay, let's measure this luck, and we'll say, the amount of luck somebody has can be either all to plus 10 positive or negative 10. And they have these little number charts where it's just like, 0 and then to negative 10 and then to positive 10. So you have positive and negative factor. And you can just use that in your pendulum, and it'll go and it'll point to some area on that map, and it'll display your intent in as best it can. And generally, once you have confidence in that process, you'll understand what it means. You'll start to realize what that pendulum is meaning. So you can take raw data and turn it into really practical numbers and things like that. So, was my phone dying? I don't think so. Somebody said, did my phone die? But my phone is going to die soon, so I am going to have to cut this shorter. But I love you guys. Throw me some comments. Throw me some love. Definitely come back and talk about this soon. Later.